The shuttle bay of Tribunal Station Velarix smelled the way every alien docking hub smelled: recycled oxygen, trace ammonia, and the ghost of a dozen biologies that had no business sharing the same air. Commander James Reeves walked off the ramp alone. No honor guard, no armor, no weapons visible on his person, though the compact inspectors who had boarded the ship 20 minutes earlier had looked at him with something that translated, across 3 species and 4 translator models, as profound disappointment that there was nothing to confiscate. He was 37, medium height, medium build, brown hair going a little gray at the temples. He wore the plain field gray of Earth's diplomatic corps, no rank insignia beyond the small pin on his collar, no medals, because 3 of the 7 species waiting for him in the Grand Chamber would read medals as a declaration of martial intent. He carried a battered canvas bag over one shoulder and a sealed diplomatic case in his left hand. That was it. That was the human. The corridor from the docking bay to the Grand Chamber was lined, wall to wall, with observers. Every species in the compact had sent representatives to Velarix for the emergency tribunal, and apparently every single one of them had decided that watching the human walk down a hallway was worth showing up early for. They pressed against the corridor barriers in clusters, Dravathi in their gleaming blue exoskeletons, Veloci rippling in their tank suits, Kreth with their dorsal membranes shifting through colors that the spectrum reader in Reeves' earpiece was working overtime to classify. He felt the weight of it, the assessment, the quiet, collective calculation of 400 alien minds looking at him and arriving at the same answer. He was small, he was soft, he had no claws, no armor plating, no venom glands, no bioluminescent threat displays. His eyes faced forward, predator configuration, yes, but the eyes themselves were an unimpressive brown. He walked upright, on 2 legs, with no tail for balance and no secondary limbs for redundancy. His skin would tear if you looked at it wrong. He was, by nearly every metric the compact used to evaluate a species, a biological afterthought. The first comment came from the Dravathi delegation. 8 feet of armored exoskeleton, compound eyes, mandibles that could shear titanium cable. One of them clicked something low to its companion. The translator pendant rendered it in a flat, polite tone that nevertheless carried the full weight of the original. That is the human. It looks like something the Veloci would keep as a pet. The corridor rippled with reaction. The Veloci made their wet, burbling sound, laughter, or the nearest equivalent. The Kreth flashed amber and gray across their membranes, which the reader tagged as amused disdain. Someone further back made a sound the translator simply logged as untranslatable, social ridicule, high confidence. Reeves kept walking. Same pace, same expression. He had been in rooms like this before. Different planet, different species, same energy. The room that looks at you and sees something less than what you are, and waits to see if you'll flinch. He'd spent enough of his life in those rooms to have stopped flinching somewhere around age 22. He reached the chamber doors, 2 slabs of Velarix ironstone carved with the sigils of every founding species. 2 Kreth guards in full ceremonial armor, each one massing somewhere north of 400 pounds, flanked the entrance. One asked for his designation. He gave it. The doors swung open. The Grand Chamber swallowed him whole. 7 raised daises in a crescent, 7 founding species, hundreds of observers in tiered galleries climbing to a ceiling 30 feet above the floor. The chamber had been built to Dravathi scale, which meant everything in it was enormous, and Reeves, at the center marker inlaid in the stone floor, was made to feel precisely as small as he was. He inclined his head. The gesture Earth's diplomatic team had spent 6 months negotiating as a species-neutral acknowledgement of peers. Nobody inclined back. Grand Arbiter Thesivane, a Dravathi so old its exoskeleton had faded to the color of old bone, spoke in rapid clicks. The translator rendered it instantly. Commander Reeves, You stand before this tribunal charged with unauthorized first contact, violation of Compact Exploration Protocol, and unilateral negotiation of a binding agreement with an unregistered species. Actions taken without compact knowledge, without compact oversight, and without compact consent. How do you answer? Reeves was quiet for a moment, not from hesitation. He'd had 11 days on the transit to Velarex to prepare. He was quiet because he'd learned that in rooms where people expected you to scramble, silence read as confidence. A small silence went a long way. I answer, he said, by asking why the Shethka were unregistered. The chamber erupted. He stood in the middle of it. The crest membranes went full spectrum, cycling through colors the reader couldn't keep up with. The Dravathi delegation clicked in rapid overlapping bursts. The Malori, who communicated in mathematical pulse sequences, transmitted something to the display screen behind the daises that rendered as text. The human is stalling. Deflection tactic, disregard. Thesavon raised one massive foreleg. The chamber quieted, slowly, like a big engine winding down. That question, the Grand Arbiter said, is not the matter before this tribunal. With respect, Reeves said, it is exactly the matter before this tribunal. I found something that the combined sensor networks of 7 spacefaring civilizations missed. For how long? Centuries? Before you judge me for how I found it, I think it's worth understanding why you missed it. He paused. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to make sure we're solving the right problem. More noise. He let it come and go. Subspeaker Ulreth, of the Veloci, pressed its tank forward on the dais. The human speaks of solving problems. The human is the problem. It violated compact law. I violated a protocol written before humanity launched its first satellite, Reeves said, and that didn't account for a species existing entirely outside your sensor range. I'll accept that. I'll also point out, he checked his watch, an old mechanical piece, analog, and that small gesture pulled eyes from every corner of the chamber. In approximately 38 minutes, a Shethka diplomatic envoy is going to dock at this station. Silence. Not the rolling, recovering kind. The sudden, total silence of 400 minds hitting the same thoughts simultaneously. You invited them here, Thesavon said. I told them, Reeves said, that if the compact was worth joining, it would know how to welcome a new voice. I told them I'd find out. He looked up at the Grand Arbiter. I'm finding out. The chamber had not yet decided how to process that, when the secondary door, the one on the far wall, the one that led to the station's high-security docking arm, opened. Not with ceremony, not with announcement. It simply opened because someone on the other side had the clearance to open it, and walked through without waiting for permission. The first thing Reeves noticed was the size. The Shethka ambassador was 12 feet tall, and moved like something that had never once, in its entire evolutionary history, needed to worry about what was behind it. Bipedal, roughly, with 4 upper limbs arranged in 2 sets, the outer pair considerably larger than the inner. Its skin was deep charcoal gray, with bioluminescent striping that pulsed slowly along its flanks, in patterns Reeves had spent 4 months learning to read. Its head was wide and flat, eyes arranged in a full horizontal band, 360 peripheral vision. Its jaw, when closed, was a seamless line of dense muscle. It was, by any honest measure, one of the most physically imposing things in the room. And it stopped when it crossed the threshold, stood still for a moment, and then, slowly, with a deliberateness that silenced every sound in the chamber, it scanned the full crescent of delegates, the galleries, the guards, the high-vaulted architecture of the compact's greatest judicial space. Then it found Reeves, and it crossed the chamber floor toward him, 30 feet, 6 strides. The impact of each footfall was low and resonant, felt in the chest more than heard with the ears. It stopped in front of him, 12 feet of apex predator, looking down. The bioluminescent stripes pulsed once, slow, even. The greeting pattern. Reeves knew it by now. The ambassador raised the largest of its 4 hands, and placed it flat against the center of its chest. Then it spoke. The sound was not language in any way the translator could fully catch. It was subsonic and supersonic at once, felt as much as heard. But there was one word, 2 syllables, that the translator had on file. The first word Reeves had ever heard from a Shethka, on a survey planet at the edge of mapped space, sitting across a fire that neither of them had built, and both of them had needed. The pendant rendered it quiet, certain. Little brother. Reeves looked up. Ambassador. The bioluminescent stripes shifted to something the reader tagged as warmth, recognition, pride adjacent. The chamber was absolutely silent. And then, slowly, it broke. Not into noise, but into something stranger. A recalibration. The Dravathi who had made the pet comment in the corridor had gone utterly still, the way prey animals go still when they realize the thing they were watching has noticed them. The Veloci subspeaker had retreated several inches back in its tank. The Kreth membranes had stopped moving entirely, the first time since Reeves had entered the room that they weren't cycling through some shade of contempt. Because the Shethka were not in any compact database, that was true. But absence from a database did not mean unknown. It did not mean undetected. It meant something else. Something the Tribunal was only now, watching this massive predator stand calm and deferential at the shoulder of a soft-bodied human, beginning to understand. Thessavane's voice, when it came, was different. Still formal, but careful in a way it had not been before. You know this species. They found us 50 years ago, Reeves said, long before the Compact made contact with Earth. They'd been watching us for a century before that. He paused. They didn't introduce themselves then. They said humanity wasn't ready. Another beat. Last year, they decided we were. They decided? They chose us, Reeves said. That's what the agreement is. Not a trade deal, not a resource arrangement, a mentorship. That's the closest human word for it. The Shethka have been out here a very long time, and they are very selective about who they bring into their confidence. He glanced up at the ambassador, who pulsed slowly. When I found their ship on survey, I didn't make first contact. I just had the good sense to listen. The Mallory delegate transmitted to the display. Query: how long have the Shethka been observing compact space? The ambassador's gaze moved, slow, deliberate, from Reeves to the Mallory dais. Then it spoke again, longer this time, the layered subsonic harmonics washing across the chamber floor like a tide coming in. The translator worked for several seconds. Then a number appeared on the display. Several gallery observers made sounds that had no clean translation. The Kreth delegate's membranes went a color the reader had never encountered before, and simply flagged as new input, classification pending. The number was larger than the Compact's entire recorded history. They've been here, Reeves said quietly, the whole time. They watched you discover fire. They watched you leave your home systems. They watched you build this station. He let that sit. They were never in your database, because they didn't want to be. And the reason they didn't want to be, he paused, looked around the room. Well, I think you're starting to get a sense of that. Thessavane was still for a long moment. Why, it said finally, did they choose humanity? Not quite a question. The sound of something vast, trying to recalibrate from the ground up. Reeves thought about how to answer. Thought about the words the ambassador had given him on that survey planet, in a language his translator still only half understood, over a fire that had burned low by the time they'd finished talking. They said, he began carefully, that every species they've ever observed, when they got powerful enough, became afraid. And when they became afraid, they became cruel. He looked at the Dravathi, at the Kreth, at the sealed Mallory suits. They said, humanity is the first species they ever watched that reached a certain level of capability and then stopped, looked around, and asked who needed help. They said, that's rare, Reeves said, Apparently it's very rare. He set his canvas bag down on the floor of the grand chamber. He clicked the latches on the diplomatic case, lifted the lid, and took out a single document, physical, printed on earth paper, the ambassador's mark already pressed into the lower corner in bioluminescent ink that had dried to a deep, permanent gold. He set it on the floor in front of him, where every eye in the room could find it. "The Shethka are applying for compact membership," he said. "They've asked Earth to sponsor them." He straightened up. "I was summoned here to answer for my conduct. I've answered. So now I'd like to know, does the compact want to move forward, or would the Tribunal prefer to spend another 40 minutes discussing whether I'm allowed to be in the room?" The chamber sat with that. The ambassador's bioluminescent stripes pulsed once, slow, golden, the deep, warm frequency that Reeves had learned, over 4 months and 100 hours of quiet conversation, was as close to a smile as the Shethka got. Thessavan looked at Reeves, looked at the document on the floor, looked at the 12-foot apex predator standing at a human's shoulder, like an old friend waiting outside a door. And then, the Grand Arbiter of the Galactic Compact, the most powerful judicial authority in recorded galactic history, did something that the official record would spend 3 subsequent sessions attempting to classify. It inclined its head. Small, deliberate. The same gesture Reeves had made when he walked through the door an hour ago. Reeves inclined back. The session recessed pending formal review. Reeves picked up his bag and his case and walked back the way he'd come, through the long corridor, past the barrier rails, past the observers still gathered in their clusters. The corridor was different now, still full, but quiet in a new way. The calculations that had been running when he walked in were running again with new data, and nobody seemed to have finished yet. The Dravathi who had made the pet comment was still at its spot along the rail. It watched him approach. When Reeves was level with it, it spoke. The pendant translated. "The Shethka called you little brother." "They did," Reeves said. The Dravathi was quiet for a moment. "In our tongue that phrase has a specific weight. It means the one who is smaller, the one you would not choose to face without." Reeves considered that. "Yeah," he said, "that's pretty close." He kept walking. Behind him the corridor stayed quiet, all the way to the door.